Hello and welcome to Notcast 266. It's the 1st of February 2023, and that means it's been 2 weeks since I last did one of these, well, technically 13 days. And I'm sure none of you have noticed that I took a little break from uploading. I noticed primarily because I was busy making flatpack furniture. That's one of the things you've got to do. And you know, guys, I'm a guy, last time I looked, we just don't notice that stuff. You know, if the wardrobes look absolutely knackered, so what? We don't notice it in the slightest. Couldn't care less. You know, have we got a TV that works? Have we got Netflix and streaming? And can we microwave our food? That's pretty much where we're going, guys, most of the time. I'm sure I'll get thrown out of the Brotherhood now for telling you that, but I don't really care, to be honest. I never wanted to be part of any club that would have me as a member. But I spent most of the past 2 weeks unpacking 172.5 kilograms of flatpack furniture. Making it, screwing it in, putting dowels into things, connecting them correctly, all that. And so it all got very, very boring and very, very tiring. And once you've started, it's probably best just to keep going until you've stopped, because certainly in most houses aren't particularly big. You've got a set. It's kind of like playing Tetris with all of your stuff, because you have to move stuff out of the way to put new stuff in, and also you need space to build the new stuff. Anyway, long story short, I've got 5 new wardrobes now, which aren't absolutely knackered and old. Some of the wardrobes which I'd inherited when I bought this place. I moved in, and the guy that had moved out had left them. He couldn't be fucking bothered to deal with them. So I was like, I can put my things in there. I'll put my things in there. I'll worry about it later. 17 years later, i.e. now, I'm now going, I really wish I'd done it 5 years ago, but I did it. And so I've now got lots of flatpack furniture, wardrobes, which don't look absolutely atrocious, old and tragically mismatched, which is probably, now I'm looking at it going, job well done. But at the time, absolutely not. I was like, I bloody hate this. So glad that I had a backlog of podcasts and concert movies on YouTube to catch up with. Today, and I should have done this on the 25th of January, by the way, but I didn't, primarily because I was busy screwing things into other things and putting them up and swearing and hammering at things and using screwdrivers. On the 25th of January, I should have done the 30th anniversary episode for There's 5th album, Dusk, which is here. On various vinyl formats, singles and so on, but I didn't, because obviously I was making wardrobes, and I'm here now on the 1st of February, a few days later, doing the same thing. This is a busy period for the band. There's lots of stuff going in there, fair chunk of record company politics, and I don't know how long it's going to take for me to talk through all of this stuff. I was a big fan of the band at this point, and Dusk is the first album that, to me at least, didn't really work the way I expected it to. I'll put it that way. Obviously, coming off the back of the Mind Bomb album, there is a touring entity having a permanent-ish lineup of 4 or 5 guys, depending on your point of view. Obviously, Matt Johnson, Dave Palmer on drums, Johnny Marr on guitar, James Eller on bass, and DC Collard on keyboards. Had toured the album into the ground, Mind Bomb, in 1989 and 1990. And I think Mind Bomb was an album that, for me, I felt, and I did this obviously in the episode when I talked about Mind Bomb a couple of months ago, was the most conventional of the other albums. And one of the things I've always liked in the records that I love is that when you listen to it, you know right from the opening notes who it is, that it couldn't sound like anybody else. When you listen to Mr. Bungle, for example, from the first moment you go, that's Mr. Bungle. No one else can sound like Mr. Bungle. Or Therapy, or when you listen to something like Infected or Soul Mining, and you kind of go, that is the. There is no other band on the world that could sound like that. Whereas with Mind Bomb, and obviously with Dusk, the instrumentation and the arrangements were more conventional. They were more straightforward. They were more obvious. And it's a great band, by the way, but I listened to it and I thought, you listen to something like Love is Stronger Than Death, which, by the way, is the best of the songs ever. But when you listen to that, you can kind of think, okay, so it could be any one of a number of bands. It could have been Talk Talk, for example. No criticism of Talk Talk. They were amazing, but it didn't sound like it absolutely positively had to be the and nobody else could possibly sound like it. So we kind of start with a intermediate release, which takes some of its material from the leftovers from the Mind Bomb sessions and some new material recorded after Mind Bomb and a live track. The EP Shades of Blue, released on 12-inch CD and other formats. Cassette single. I had the cassette single. What an awful format the cassette single is. And this brought back the well-known kind of Andy Dog Johnson kind of artwork there. This would have made a great LP cover, by the way, but it wasn't to be. Instead, it was it became the EP cover, and I think a variation of it might have been used for, or more correctly, it kind of seems reminiscent of the versus the World that was released in early 1991. Shades of Blue was released in early 1991 as well, with the lost studio track Jealous of Youth that hadn't been released in the UK, and a live version of Another Boy Drowning taken from the Matt Johnson, now the solo album Burning Blue Soul, and the cover version of Solitude by I think was it Miles Ellington, and Dolphins as well, which features Matt and Johnny Marr, and on Solitude DC Collard. So not my standard kind of song actually to listen to, very traditional kind of bluesy soulsy cover. And I was listening to it the other week and my partner came in and was like, what's this? And I was like, it's the. And they're like, who are they? And I'm like, remember that band that I saw a few years ago that you asked who are they? Same band. But there you are. Shades of Blue was, I think, somewhat a forgotten release actually in the band's history. I don't have the CD. I have it in a slightly different configuration elsewhere, but it kind of bought the band a little bit of time before the release on the 4th of January 1993. That's 30 years and a month ago of the first single from the upcoming studio record. The single is Dogs of Lust, arguably, possibly the last great the single, or maybe the last one that most people know. If you think about, well, what came out after that? You kind of go, well, Slow Motion Replay, Love is Stronger Than Death, neither of which were particularly big hits. But Dogs of Lust was released as a 7-inch on white vinyl. I don't have that. A 12-inch picture disc. Here it is, backed with a remix of The Violence of Truth, remixed by Bruce Lampkov, and a live version of Infected from the Royal Albert Hall, taken from the versus the World sell-through VHS, which still isn't on DVD. And there were 2 CD singles. There was this one, which was backed with a live version of Jealous of Youth, recorded at the Royal Albert Hall. The DNA remix of Armageddon Days Are Here Again, which was on a promo 12-inch, and a live version of Beyond Love, which has the different and extended ending encoder on it, and a second CD single. For some reason, these CDs were, one of these was numbered. Number 9,941. Bands would dream of selling 9,941 copies of anything these days, I suspect. But no, Dogs of Lust got a second CD single, again backed with the remix of Violence of Truth, and the remix, or more correctly, the live version of Infected. And it folded out in these weird and unusual Z-Pack things, is what they're called, presumably, because you can do that with them. And it kind of looks like a Z, a terrible format, which I'm very glad never got much traction in the big bad world. But well designed, quite nicely designed, with a space for your limited edition CD single number 2 here, ladies and jelly spoons. And kind of just sat there on your shelf, remaining unplayed as you looked at it and go, well, why didn't you put all the live tracks from the Royal Albert Hall on one CD? And then why didn't you put the Violence of Truth and the Armageddon Days remix on the other CD? So at least you've got some consistency in your formats. No, absolutely not. Why make things easy when you can make things hard? Dogs of Lust was, like most of Dusk, it was a very conventional song. So the weird and quirky elements that had made the band sound like the had started to be sanded down and eased off a bit. The band had become less weird, more functional as opposed to elaborate. And a great example of that is if you look at modern architecture, and I think I've said this before, modern architecture is very bland, it's very grey, it's very boxy, as if there's no imagination that's possible. And so therefore you start to be constrained by the limitations that you've put upon it. The days of very ornate, very flowery, ostentatious kind of design, and the same thing with sound, it just makes things duller and blander and more boring, and everything becomes very fucking beige. And whilst Dusk is, in my opinion, now it's an album that I've grown to love over time, at the time it came out, I did not like it at all. My friend Mark, who introduced the to me way back in about 1988, got a promo copy of Dusk in a folder with a standard CD, and we listened to it and we were like, oh, this is not good. This is not what we thought it was going to be at all. The band had evolved into almost being normal, and you could kind of hear that the quirky edges had been taken off it. What I wanted from the was a continuation and an extrapolation of the band that had made Infected, which wasn't really a band, and Soul Mining. And what we got was something very different indeed. A different set of influences, a different set of life experiences. So for me, when Dusk came out, by the way, I was 19. So I was still, and you can imagine being 19 years old, you just kind of go, well, I want more of the same stuff that I loved when I was 16 years old. You don't want something that sounds like it was made by, the world's oldest 29-year-old. Sorry, I can't remember how old Matt is. He very probably was 29 or 30. And when I was 29 or 30, if I'd been that age and I'd gone through those experiences, had a huge amount of grief and loss, I would have loved this album. But that wasn't where I was. I was coming out of the cusp of the very hedonistic era which we had. So, for example, Soul Mining was very much the sound of both a bonkers Friday night out and a pretty regretful Saturday morning. Infected was the sound of a crazy lost weekend, plus the lost week after, as you find out that the sun is too loud and the cat thunders into the room. Dusk was turning its sights inward. Mind Bomb was a very external album that looked at the theory of conflict between people on a personal basis and a political basis. Dusk is almost exclusively a personal album about emotions and experiences as you age through life. The adolescent version of you that maybe had got into the several years ago was not present on this album at all. The demos were, according to the book Long Shadows and High Hopes, which I strongly recommend if you have an interest in as well as, by the way, I do recommend Johnny Marr's autobiography, Set the Boy Free. I think I have a signed copy which I bought from Waterstones. There you are, in the days when people would sign things to sell more copies. So you think about all the things which were in the mix at that point, and then the live version of the band, Matt, Johnny, Dave, James, DC Collard, effectively went into a bunker in a studio in Shoreditch in London. They turned all the heating on and they turned all the lights to red, and they played these dark, swampy, heavily blues rock influenced tracks, almost like someone was trying to take classic blues songs and update them for 1993, and at the same point to create a kind of weird and unusual material and give it a kind of standard rock approach. So the demos were built up slowly. The songs were rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed, and layers and layers and layers were added onto them, to the point where every single note that's on the album is the best choice for the next note to play for each one of the instruments. And you kind of think about when this is something that happens in movies as well. Actually, when people make movies, often they just do, well, we'll do this and we'll do that, and then there's a car chase, and then that happens. And the best movies are the ones that have an internal logic and structure and narrative that stand up to repeated viewing. So every time you see it, you don't go, hang on a minute, Marty McFly, what about the fact that you've got a second time travelling car that's stuck in a cave in the desert? Why don't you just go in there and get it? Surely you know about that now. Of course, that completely spoils Back to the Future 3, but the film is now 34 years old. I think we're past spoiler territory. The other thing is, of course, if you think about it and you think about the next note to play, the guitar solos may feel and may sound very almost improvised or very instinctual. At one point, it's also, they've tried all the other alternatives. They've tried all the other permutations that they could think of, and that's the formula that they've set on. I'm reminded of Kraftwerk, who described themselves, or did describe themselves in the days when they did new material, as musical workers. They're kind of like experimenting, and then when the experiments ring true, they lay them down, and that's the material that they've got. I think they were doing roughly the same thing in 1992. The demos were built up slowly. They evolved over time. They were worked and worked and worked on, and then the album was effectively recorded in, I think, 4 to 5 days in a very concentrated burst of activity. But then at that point, it's almost transcription of the material. You're working the material up to the point where, the actual tapping, the writing of a book doesn't take that long. You can write 2,000 words in an hour if you don't mind getting RSI. And then you write 300,000 words, and then that's 160 hours. You divide that, that's about 5 weeks of pretty solid typing. But the thing that takes the time is not the time, it's the time between the time, the space between the spaces. It's the thinking and the activity and the bits where you go through all the other options before you actually move. Because you think about it, the guitar solo, it's comfortably numb, it's about 2 minutes long. The section with the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man in Ghostbusters is less than 3 minutes long. It's about 2 minutes 56 seconds. It may only be, the amount of time it takes to eat a chocolate bar, but it's all the work that's gone into it that makes it last forever. And that's what they were doing when they were recording this. At the time, the band were listening to lots of blues singers. They were trying to capture a live sound. They were trying to capture the sound and the roar that the band had on stage that was kind of hinted at in the versus the world sell-through video. And they were trying to create a kind of element of modern blues, a kind of different angle to take, which no one else was really kind of doing at that point. Grunge was huge. Nirvana were huge. I think probably the nearest bands to the at that point were only just starting out were Afghan Wigs, are doing the same kind of, tearing your soul out and putting it and leaving it all out on the stage, and then seeing what happens from there, and being unafraid to take the old ideas and present them in new ways. There was started to be, I think, a bit of a split in the band's permutation and composition. Matt and Johnny were quite close. Dave Palmer, who played drums on the Versus the World tour, and Mindbomb had started to peel away a bit from the band. He was getting far more into club culture, and so Dave plays drums on 4 songs on the album, not 10. Bruce Smith, who was of the Pop Group and is now in Public Image Limited, plays on a couple, and there's a couple of other drummers that make appearances as well. So the idea of there being this band of 4 guys is not really accurate in Dusk. It's something a little bit different. It's kind of like the weak point, or the point in which the band started to fragment, was around Dave. So actually, let's have a quick look. Dogs of Lust, for example, has a chap called Vinnie Kalusia, who I think was playing with Sting of all people at that point. Bruce Smith plays on This Is the Night and Helpline Operator, and then we have I should have done this before, but I'm lazy and I didn't. And yeah, Vinny also plays on Bluer Than Midnight. So we have a pretty different kind of setup for the group than previously. And I think it maybe if that club culture influence hadn't been there, the band's lineup may have lasted a little bit longer. As it was, the magic spell of that quartet had been broken by the fragmentation of the personalities. James Eller was offered a solo deal, which is not something that happened very often, and decided that was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and took it. So ducked out of the band's touring activity. And Johnny Marr, as I understand it, had recently become a father and wanted to stay at home, and completely understandable, so didn't tour Dusk either. So the album came out, and it was more of Mindbomb. It was Mindbomb taken much further down the motorway than I think most people were really expecting it. I was hoping for something that taken some of the quirky edges of things like Infected, some of the retrofuturism of soul mining, and put that into a modern frame. Dusk is not that at all. This is an album that is framed by and heavily influenced by grief and tragedy. Matt's brother had died quite suddenly, not long before the album had come out, or more correctly, before the album was written. And so the album was dripping in kind of grief and dripping in kind of like sense of lost and questions like, well, who am I? What am I? Why am I here? How long have I got? What do I do with the time that I've got on the planet? How do I adjust to this relationship? Because the things that you had taken for granted, you know, the fact that, you know, you've got a brother or a relationship or your parents and they're going to live forever, you're going to grow old with them, had suddenly been shattered by the reality of, you know, death and grief. And I mean, certainly for me, a few years after this album came out, what I'd found was taking things for granted, or a certainty that you had about certain things, could not happen. So you couldn't accept, or you couldn't relax into the fact that, you know, your relationship was going to last, because it might suddenly be completely derailed overnight by an unexpected event, or your family structure might be broken by something equally catastrophic, such as a car crash, which you might not ever see, or a heart attack, or something like that you might not expect to happen, that suddenly would just, you know, crash in through into the living room and tear the established foundations of your life to pieces. And Dusk is an album that is, I think, strongly grappling with that sense of loss, and that sense of not being sure about things. That uncertainty had suddenly become a really big part of life. The first track is True Happiness This Way Lies. I know it's taken me 21 minutes to get to that point, but at least 4 minutes of that was me talking about wardrobes. True Happiness This Way Lies, which was Matt, just on his own, him and a guitar, doing a very unusual kind of a song that he hadn't really done before, almost as a kind of like a preacher from hell, sermonizing about, or delivering a sermon about the nature of life and reality. You know, have you ever wanted something so badly through the day and through the night that it possessed your very soul, until you finally get it, and then you realize it isn't what you wanted after all, and then those self-same sickly little thoughts now go and attach themselves to something or somebody new, and the whole goddamn thing starts all over again. It's and you can interpret that lyric as being like the central tenet of the album. Is, you know, there's that great quote in Alabama 3's Exile on Cold Harbor Lane album, one of the very best albums of the 90s, where it says, you know, that thing that you hold on to, that belief, whatever it is, the thing that gets you through the day, it is a lie. And when you finally achieve whatever it is that you're trying to get, be it family or money or power or cats or whatever, when you get it, you'll suddenly realize that wasn't the answer. That was the object around which you said, if only I do this, if only I do that, if only I meet somebody, or if only I have money, or if only I have a relationship, or if only I, you know, get the #1 album, or whatever it is. And that's not the thing that works. That's not the answer. And you can fool yourself, but that's not what it is. And it's something else which, you know, you can't touch or hold or feel or capture. It's a fleeting moment. That's the thing that everybody is chasing, is that moment where suddenly actually you don't even realize you're chasing anything. You're kind of just floating on a sea of feelings, and the negative elements of it just disappear, and you don't even know that they're there. And, you know, as Matt sings on the same song, you know, he's never found it at the bottom of a glass, or never found it in the arms of a girl, you know, and never found religion, never found peace with the religion of the world either. And it's a great way to start. It's a thing that really threw the album off to a left field track. I kind of was listening to it and going, where is the other, and what have you done with them? But it's taken me until my mid-40s, I think, before I really grasped just how good this album is. You know, it's revered now as one of their very best records, as it should be. It's bloody brilliant. But at the time it came out, I was a teenager. I was not in the place to accept what this album was offering and the direction that the band had taken. And I think that the commercial performance of Dusk, which was pretty solid but not amazing, and the live shows, which again were pretty solid but never took the band to the next level of you know, headlining Wembley Arena, were things that consolidated, as opposed to kind of move the band forward or nearer to some degree of financial security. There was that opening lyric, which is, Matt casting himself as a preacher who's doing some kind of Buddhist soul searching, looking through the grief of youth, the loss of his brother, the grid of life, and going, well, is this it? Is this what it is? And suddenly kind of like, well, that's not really it. Happiness is something far less tangible, far less material than things. And I'm well aware of my privilege saying that in a room that's absolutely chock full of music. But music is my art. I'm always reminded of the thing that David Bowie said, which is, art was the only thing he wanted to own. It was the only thing that helped him, or he would wake up and he would look at a piece of art or experience a piece of art, and it would change how he saw the world. And that's pretty much the reason why I've got so much shed. Is that's what music does for me. Everybody has their thing, whatever it is, and it's different for everybody. And Love is Stronger Than Death, the second song off the album, the third song to be released as a single, is, in my opinion, the absolute best song that Matt Johnson has ever released. And very probably one of the best songs ever. If I was doing a covers album, I'd be really tempted to put it on there, but I do know I wouldn't necessarily be good enough to actually, I wouldn't be able to do the song justice. It couldn't be as bad as Duran Duran's covers album. Very little that of recorded music could ever be as bad as that, but it still could be a big disaster. I'd love to have heard Bowie do Love Is Stronger Than Death, by the way. Wow, what an amazing thing he would have done with that. But he didn't. We are where we are. This is now, that was then. And Love Is Stronger Than Death has the opening lyric of me and my friend were out walking in the cold light of morning. And that was about the walk that Matt and Johnny would take every day going towards the studio, is that they'd walk along the Thames in the morning before they started recording, and they'd go in, and then they'd do the songs. And that was pretty much how it worked. And that is why the album it's probably one of the best ones, because over time, as we've grown older and we've experienced love and loss and tragedy and all the things that go with it, Dusk has become far more resonant with the more life experiences that there are. And in fact, I always remember when the last time I saw which hopefully is not the last time I'll ever see them, Brixton Academy, 2018, a venue that it was enormously oversold and has now been closed, lost its license due to Dorman taking basically cash in hand to give access to people without tickets. Pretty disgraceful state of affairs. I remember being at pretty much 2/3 of the way back at Brixton Academy and being very, very crowded, and he was singing Love Is Stronger Than Death, and maybe 20-30 feet over that way a fight broke out because people would not shut the fuck up whilst Matt was singing a song about burying his brother. And I'm sat there going, I've been at funerals where this song has been played, and you just can't stop fucking yapping during the middle of a gig. Short way of saying, when the band are on, shut the heck up. Although I suspect if you've watched 28 minutes of this so far, you'll probably agree with me. And that is basic good manners. There are 6, 7, 8 billion rooms in the world that don't have a band playing at any given point in time. Chat loudly in one of those rooms. There are plenty of them around. Don't do it when the fucking band are on, because that band mean a lot to a lot of people. Most bands mean a lot to somebody. So be nice, be kind, and don't be rude. The third song, Dogs of Lust, on the album, obviously the first single that was released, is, I think, it reminds me of, the quote from John Betjeman, which he said on his deathbed, which is two things. One which was, I wish I'd had more sex, and the other one was, having a penis is kind of like being shackled to an idiot. And Dogs of Lust is one of those songs that's around how, again, and it's a thing that runs through True Happiness, This Way Lies as well, and a Helpline Operator and some of the other songs, is that moment where you lose perspective and focus of everything that's around you, because you become focused on something, an object or an experience or a person, and you're shackled to desire in whatever form it comes, whether that's alcohol or sex, or going to see lots of bands, or owning lots of records, or going to see all the football matches, or having a nice car or a big bank account, whatever it is. When you're shackled to that thing, and that's your drive, your focus is, that's the thing, you get tunnel vision and everything else disappears, and that's the only thing that you can see. And Dogs of Lust is kind of like basically pointing fun at stupid men doing stupid things, because they look at someone and go, oh, she's good looking, I'd like to take her to bed, or whatever. It's a song about, I keep reaching up and they drag me back down. Wherever I try to hide, I will always be found, and out of my mind into my life. And it's a really interesting lyric. Very few songs actually go, you're stupid, but it's kind of someone being able to step out of themselves, have what alcoholics refer to as the moment of clarity, as Samuel L. Jackson says in Pulp Fiction, to be able to take a step back and outside of themselves and look at that and go, oh boy, I've prostrated myself and I'm crawling around on my knees for something, and I look stupid and ridiculous. And I think we've all seen that. We've all seen normally it's a guy who is quite keen on somebody that is often substantially younger than them, and they're kind of like, oh, she's amazing and whatever, and we're like, no, act your age, not your shoe size, honey, as Prince sang on that rather fantastic Kiss. And obviously later Tom Jones. We have This Is the Night, which is track 4, and that is a sequel to This Is the Day, unsurprisingly. The idea of that moment of reckoning where everything comes in, and you can almost delay or defer the consequences of your actions. But with This Is the Night, this is kind of like a song that is almost kind of saying, this is the night where things will start to happen, where your consequences of your actions and your decisions will start to visit themselves upon you. And then we have the second single released from the album, which is Slow Motion Replay, which is shooting the video for Slow Motion Replay was, I think, the last thing that Johnny ever did as a member of the band. Was a trip to New York with Matt to film the home video release of From Dusk Until Dawn, which is still unavailable digitally and can't be found on YouTube. It's a Tim Pope documentary film that runs about 50 minutes, where Matt and Johnny go around New York and they meet various people and they ask them various questions. And this features a number of songs a number of material which isn't on the album. Tracks called Scenes from Arctic Twilight, which appears on the B-side of Slow Motion Replay, and various versions of Dogs of Lust and similar. Slow Motion Replay was released on 2 CD singles. Here's the CD single which I own. I don't own the second CD single for reasons which I'll explain shortly, which is backed with Scenes from Arctic Twilight parts 1 to 5. So that's 5 short instrumental tracks, and they were all put together primarily to get around UK chart restriction rules, which said that you could only have 3 songs on a release, or a maximum of 20 minutes, unless it was remixes. So the best way of getting the 5 songs that comprise the Arctic Twilight suite was to call them Scenes from Arctic Twilight and make them 1 track on the CD, which are, the tracks are Ancient Lights, Wounded, Balloon, Unseasonable Weather, and Arctic Twilight. Run about 8.5 minutes, and they're on the second CD, this CD here, of Slow Motion Replay. The second CD, which I do not own, was backed with a chunk of remixes of Dogs of Lust, and the reason I don't own it is because it was released as a promotional CD in America here, with the spermicide and squirmicide mix of Dogs of Lust, which was remixed by J.G. Thirlwell, also known as Fetus. And these were promotional remixes that were released in America. You couldn't get them apart from on this promo CD at the time that the album came out. So, of course, I bought it because that's the kind of guy that I am. I'm a record collector, baby, so why don't you kill me? And there was a third remix that was on the CD of Slow Motion Replay that later also appeared on the Solitude EP and album, which is here. and that is the Germicide mix, which I will get to shortly. So, flipping over the album, side 2. By the way, Sony, pull your fucking fingers out and stick this thing back out on vinyl. Stop pissing us about and stop making a point of passive-aggressive non-compliance with Matt Johnson because he audited you for shady accounting practices. Stop mucking us about. And put the album back out on vinyl. You've got the rights and you can make the money by doing so. Sorry, public service announcement number 1 with guitars is over. Side 2, I don't have the vinyl copy of the album because I was both cash conscious and space aware, so I was living in quite a small place at the time, and LPs were big, CDs were small. That was my way of thinking. Of course, I regret that now. I should have bought the vinyl version of Dusk. There's a whole bunch of other things I should have done, but I didn't, and here we are. Helpline Operator, the first track on side 2, is kind of like a continuation of some of the themes that we've got from This Is the Night and Dogs of Lust. In ye olde days, there were, I think, kind of like chat lines that you could call that cost something like 35 pence a minute, where you could have a conversation with a very bored person, normally a woman. And sometimes the conversation would be big sexy time, and sometimes the conversation would be almost like a form of therapy. I don't know, but you would go in the back pages of the newspapers. There'd all be numbers that were prefixed with 0898, and they'd have a tiny print, calls charged at 35p a minute, women desperate to speak to horny men or whatever it was. And Helpline Operator is a kind of like an extrapolation of that, going, well, actually, although that was the official kind of verdict of what the point of those was. Officially, they would say, oh yeah, we're connecting people that want to talk. Yes, what you're selling is a transactional approach. It's not, people are, sometimes people will mistake the way to cure loneliness or whatever it is through sex and intimacy, which is actually less intimate because intimacy doesn't exist. You're trying to create it through a physical proximity, whereas an intimacy is created by the relationship that's between the two souls as opposed to the relationship that's between the two bodies. And Helpline Operator kind of takes a transactional approach to that and goes, well, actually what you're doing is you're selling sex to people, and the people are mistaking that for a degree of form of intimacy. It's pretty cynical, it's dark, but it totally fits in with the themes of the album, especially those themes which are laid forward in This Is the Night and Dogs of Lust. The idea Dogs of Lust, the idea about put your tongue into the mouthpiece and whisper in my ear and admit to me the things that you can't admit to yourself. It's a slinky, kind of almost sordid song with a musical backing that is obviously kind of quite heavily influenced by some areas of traditional rock, but at the same point is also far more mature than the vast majority of that type of genre. It's a real unsung and unheralded masterpiece, I think, of Matt's writing. And we also have track 7 is Sodium Light Baby, which is not I think as well known as it probably should be, because track 7 on an album, side 2, track 2 is often kind of just glossed over, really. You're starting to get into filler territory, but Dusk has very little in the way of filler. And Sodium Light Baby is, again, a track that is around that element of desire and lust and everything that goes with it. The idea of that you're the strangest feeling that I've ever had. And from the day that we are born until the day that we die, we are hostage to our heart's desires. And though I ride through this city, I can't escape from you. It's a different lyrical approach than we had on Mind Bomb and Infected and Soul Mining. Effectively, it is Matt kind of laying out quite clearly that in his mind that the relationships that we build as people between each other are more important than politics, and the way that we treat each other is very, very important. And if we treat each other with kindness and we are right, then the world will be, if we are kind and if we are polite, then the world will be made kind of right, as Paddington said in the fantastic Paddington 2, the best sequel of all time, Paddington 2, and I will arm wrestle you if you disagree with me. But there we are. Sorry, detour into mild bit of film criticism. And of course, Lung Shadows, track 8, is, I think, it's kind of forgotten because it's not really played live. It's a very slow, not necessarily ambient, but more a kind of atmospheric piece. And Dusk as an album is starting to lean towards, and you can see it from the cover art there, is this tortured man, very clearly a man who's somehow dealing with whatever agonies that he's got to deal with, hovering over the dusky silhouette of London town. It's a very London album, and its subtitle, Dusk, is Entre chien et loup, which is a French phrase, and I forget what it means, but it's something like, the space between day and night, enter the dogs of night, something like that. Blue of the Midnight, track 9, absolutely. We're in the final straight of the LP now, and again, that and Lonely Planet, 2 classics, but again, songs that I think are often kind of overlooked, because Dusk as a whole, aside from the rabid part of the fan base, hello, I'm part of that too, is generally overlooked by people that like the people that like the either you really like the or you kind of Infected, it's all right, This Is the Day is okay. They kind of sound a bit like OMD, right? Wrong, that type of thing. And I think Blue of the Midnight is a great track. But then the last song, which I think I saw the play live in 2018, Lonely Planet, which may have given its name to the Lonely Planet tour books. May not have done. I suspect Matt didn't get a check from the Lonely Planet books as a result, but you can't always have it necessarily. And I think on Lonely Planet, by the way, you've got backing vocals by Zeke Manuka, who appeared on a couple of the early albums, and Paul Webb, who I think is connected to Talk as well. And again, it's the 5 musicians making a noise in a tiny room in a basement. The idea that planet Earth is slowing down, and wherever you look around, take me by the hand and lead me through these desert sands to the shores of a promised land. And if you can't change the world, change yourself. It's a great way to end what is effectively the most well, seen by many people as the last really definitive studio their album. There are other studio albums after this. In fact, there's I think 6 or 7 of them, and I will get to talking about those in due course. But this is the album which really saw the kind of heading over the Terminator of Sunset into a future which was, they were never really as big again after the release of this album. There was a tour, which was the band lineup changed dramatically, by the way. So they recruited, I think, Keith Joyner on guitar, and Jared Nicholson was on bass, and they went into the studio in New York, and they rehearsed, and they played a one-off show at Sony Music Studios on May the 5th, 1993, that was released on this promotional CD, The Live in New York. Yeah, it's a bootleg. A cassette version of this was shrink wrapped to some copies of Dusk in America to try and sell a few more copies. But it was, this is a 7-track live CD, recorded using the new lineup of the group from the first public show which the band made. And I didn't like the live arrangements that took place on this tour. I'll kind of explain why. Is that I think the dexterity and the agility of that lineup, which had ceased to exist, had started to become very flat. It had become flattened, and I've heard this in Morrissey's band over time as well. Is that kind of sense of delicacy and precision has been somewhat squashed by the fact that new musicians have come in and they weren't necessarily there for the birth of the children. So the songs are things that they've inherited, not things that they've brought up. And so you end up with quite a garage rock approach to Infected. You've got quite a kind of lumpen version of Armageddon Days Are Here Again. The arrangements, if they were played exactly the same as the studio versions, nobody would mind, but they've tried to do something a little bit different, and when you try to do things a little bit differently, it doesn't always work. So the Live in New York is, I think, where I started, and I listened to the radio broadcast, this recorded at Brixton in 1993. It was broadcast on British radio in the summer of 1993. This is the bootleg Save Me that was released on KTS Records, Kiss the Stone Records, who specialised in radio broadcasts. And this is the closest thing that you will get to a Dusk live album, apart from possibly a future official bootleg. What it does is I listened to this in my bedroom in Cottridge in England, Birmingham, and the radio broadcast was on at 9 o'clock, and I think it was 9 o'clock on a Wednesday. And so in a summer night, Wednesday 1993, I was at home and I was a student. I had no money, so I was trying to make life last. The only money I could get, because I couldn't get a job because all students had come back from university, and suddenly you had, I don't know, 500,000 or 1 million or 2 million people that were in the workforce on a temporary basis, all clamouring for the same few jobs. And if you didn't get the job, you didn't get any unemployment benefit or anything. You were basically just had to live on handouts from your parents. So as a 20-year-old, I was living on handouts from my parents, having been thoroughly thrown in the trash can by the government. And so my summers when I was 20 years old were like an exercise in trying to make life last as long as it possibly could on fuck all money. And so I recorded this off the radio, and just about 1 minute to 9, my mum kind of came upstairs and we just had a chat for about 3/4 of an hour. It was lovely, just a chat. But what it meant was I didn't hear that, because Radio 1 was broadcasting on 99.7 FM or whatever it was, 97.9 FM, and I was tuned into 97.8. My whole recording of that show for years had a tiny little buzz because I was ever so slightly out of frequency. So of course I bought the CD when I got the opportunity to do it, and I heard these arrangements of the songs off the album played by the new lineup of the band, and I must admit I was not a huge fan of what they've done to the arrangements. The tour, they played Infected in a new kind of garage rock version. They had Soul Mining, which they kind of rebuilt and stuck back together, and that sounded pretty good. But we also had That Was the Day, a new version of This Is the Day, which I didn't think was particularly good. And so the last kind of single that was released from the album was Love Is Stronger Than Death, the aforementioned fantastic song, which I absolutely love. And Love Is Stronger Than Death again had 2 CDs. It had this one, which was backed with 3 live tracks from the Royal Albert Hall: The Sinking Feeling, The Mercy Beat, and Armageddon Days Are Here Again. Again, in one of those disgracefully ugly Z packs. What the hell were they thinking, guys? Were they even thinking? Who knows? A format which you'll probably never see manufactured again, with a picture of a crucified Jesus on the front, because why do anything that wouldn't offend somebody? And the second CD, Love Is Stronger Than Death, which features 3 songs recorded at the show in New York, which is also on the 7 songs here. So the only song on this CD single, which isn't on this, is a version of Soul Mining, and there are 5 or 6 songs on The Live in New York that aren't on here. If you look carefully on Discogs, you can probably pick this up quite affordably and quite cheaply, and I strongly recommend, if you're a The completist, is to get a copy of this. The other thing I also recommend to get, if you are a The completist, is to get, wherever I may have put it, Bootleg 4 from the band's official website. Bootleg 4 is, as it officially says, a cleaned up version of a circulating show recorded in 1993, sometime in 1993 during a European leg of the Lonely Planet tour. Some of these recordings may have appeared on earlier unauthorized bootlegs. They have been cleaned up at Studio Sidiola. Not to muck about, this is the Brixton Show from 1993 that has been remastered by Matt. And were the given the dignity of multi-disc, deluxe, expanded editions and reissues, this undoubtedly would have been the live CD that was included on it. And we also would have got a DVD edition of From Dusk Until Dawn. So thanks very much, Sony, for being obstreperous, stubborn bastards, punishing your artist for wanting to be paid for the work that they've done. you have killed the reissue industry for one of the greatest bands of the 20th century. There's a couple of other releases which happened around about this time. A secret, well, not secret, but a very obscure track sneaked out on Volume 6 compilation. It was an instrumental demo called Lip Tripping that was recorded in the run-up to the Dusk period. My version, somewhat handily, is so old now that the glue has given out and the pages fall out. So I very rarely open it. In fact, I think that's the first time I've opened it in the past 10 or so years, and probably it'll be another 10 years before I open it again. I just put the CD into my CD drive, ripped it, and then added it into my Dusk B-sides playlist. Lip Tripping also got an appearance in a remixed form, and this is the only other place it's been issued, on a pretty obscure The album called Film Music, which was sold at the Royal Festival Hall in 2002, and that's CD2 are the singles, and CD1 are the instrumental film music tracks, which were recorded by Matt and licensed for various film and TV appearances. Not all of them were broadcast. It features 46 songs on it, film music. It is the rarest commercially released The artifact. And it has a number of unreleased material and unheard songs and alternate instrumental versions of things like Good Morning Beautiful and The Violence of Truth and Long Shadows and Helpline Operator and things like that, as well as unreleased songs like Coming Home, Blind Spirits, Suddenly, The Unbreakable Heart, Darkness Rising, and lots of others. Slow Doses as well, which is on here, but I'll get to that when I talk about 2002. I'm just giving you a little teaser of something which, frankly, I'm quite surprised I own, because there was only 500 copies of that. The band toured in 1993. I didn't see any of the shows because I was, again, a poor broke student. And the band's lineup, as I said, changed. So Johnny Marr wasn't touring, Keith Joyner was in the band, James Eller wasn't touring. We had Jared Nicholson, I think, on bass. Jim Fitting joined on harmonica. And halfway through the tour, Dave Palmer left to join fucking Rod Stewart, of all people. I'm sure Rod Stewart paid more money and is a lovely man, but for God's sake, Rod Stewart, oh God, I think possibly the three artists that I despise the most are Rod Stewart, Phil Collins, and fucking Sting. And so I can't understand why anybody would want to play with those three particularly washed up people who are creatively bankrupt. Yeah, that's another Notcast I'm going to go to, I think, is why I hate Sting, Phil Collins and Rod Stewart so much. But obviously, if you could be anything, why be boring? Why be bland? Why make music that means nothing and says nothing of any importance to anyone? Being able to make records is a privilege, it's a pleasure, it's a rare opportunity. You need to grasp that by the throat and be as amazing as you possibly can. And then if you're going to end up doing a concept album about a sad fucking lion for Disney, you aren't an artist, you're a hack, and it's a job, and you don't deserve the job. Give the work and give the opportunity to record music to somebody that fucking deserves it. Okay? Sorry, I thought I was talking to Sting and Rod Stewart and fucking Rod Stewart there. I don't understand why anyone would want to play drums for Rod Stewart. Then again, if I knew how much they were paid, I might change my mind, but I probably won't. So yeah, Dave Palmer left the group, and the band got a new drummer, Andy Kubisky, who else did he play with here? He played with Nine Inch Nails, actually, on the Downward Spiral album, but not on the Downward Spiral tour. And we had a new configuration of the band, which is here. And the band released an EP following the tour called Solitude, which is, in the UK, it was 4 tracks, which were That Was the Day, a re-recorded, rearranged version of This Is the Day, a new studio recording of Infected called Disinfected, and a remix of Helpline Operator, and a remix of Dogs of Lust, the Germicide mix. Unfortunately, That Was the Day was the last really major chart hit that The had, and it's a pretty awful version of the song. It neuters, for me, all of the interesting arrangements and musical ideas in the song and flattens it into a kind of Bon Tempi organ preset number one almost kind of pub singer approach. I hate the version of That Was the Day that's on Solitude, and the version of Disinfected really should have been hived off as a Tom Waits B-side, and not a good Tom Waits B-side either. Solitude was released as a 4-track EP in the UK. In America, it was a 9-track album, kind of acting as a kind of an interregnum and a kind of an encore to the Dusk period, again featuring this rather unusual photograph taken, I think, from the sessions for From Dusk Until Dawn, featuring also the tracks that were on the Shades of Blue EP, and adding in one of the remixes, the Violence of Truth remix as well. So this is kind of like a B-sides album for Dusk, which was only released in America. Charted in the UK. Matt's last appearance on Top of the Pops, I think, was in the studio singing That Was the Day, with wearing a Michael Jackson shirt, of all things, which I wasn't expecting to see when I saw it. Although I didn't even know he'd been on Top of the Pops for this release until last week when it was broadcast again on BBC4, because I was at university in Leicester and I did not have a television that worked. So I ended up only finding out about this stuff after it happened. That is the Dusk album. I think at the time it came out, it didn't resonate with me at all. Sorry, it didn't, because I think I wasn't mature enough, really. Over time, I've really got to love this record and see it for all of its glory. But like a fine wine, it has taken time to mature, and it has taken me a long time to get to the point of grasping just how good this record is. At the time it came out, I was not pleased by it, and I decided to go and listen to New Order's Republic instead, which, in retrospect, was still probably a really good idea, because Republic is a really good record. But Dusk has shown itself to be a fine album that takes a while for one to fully appreciate all the textures and flavours that sit within it. Right, that is 57 minutes of me talking about the album, and if you've made it to the end, thank you so much for your patience and your time. Hopefully I have made your washing up, stroke housework, stroke dusting, or commute less boring. If I've made it more boring, I'm really sorry about that. I can't offer you a refund because I don't charge any money for these. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other. Stay beautiful, and I will see you soon. As ever, if you have a suggestion for something you'd like me to talk about, do put it in the comments section. And if you've got a suggestion for anything else, as long as it's not rude, do let me know. So I will see you all soon, and thank you very much. Until the next time, adios amigos. Bye.